Peter.
Very good right now. Right. So I see that we have 9 o'clock. So let's maybe, as Wednesday, let's maybe wait a moment, just for some more people dropping in. So let me already say to those who participate, Alex, can you see somehow how many we are? No clue.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 9 at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's more than Rainer told me that what we should expect. So we need to do a real session. Yeah. So let's just see. Wait a moment. So Alex, while we are all waiting, I don't know whether Alex, the other Alex, is in the meeting. Guess not.
No, he's not.
Yeah. So I just sent an email to a response to him on his point, and also mentioned Stian's. Do you say Stian or Stian? Stian. Stian. Also mentioned Stian's going about Stian's point. So you will put you in CC. So maybe we can have a chat about this.
Okay.
So we have now 2 seconds over 9, 2 minutes over 9. So let's maybe start. So welcome to this session on this BoF session on Canonical Workflow Framework for Research, as we call it. My name is Peter Wittenberg. I come from the Max Planck Society. My co-chairs are Limor Peer, Maggie Hellström, and Alex Hardesty. Alex is around. And I guess for Limor comes from US, Yale University, I guess. It's too early. And I don't know, Maggie, I think Maggie had something to do. So let's see that myself and Alex, that we can run this meeting. Well, the inspiration of this initiative, so we don't want to invent new technologies or so. The inspiration for this meeting, as you will see in a moment, or this initiative, as you will see in a moment, is that some of us in the last summer, and I will go on this, had deep insight into about 75 research infrastructure reports and plans. Great stuff. And we saw a lot, or we could extract a lot of conclusions from these deep insights. I said it's not about reinventing some technology, but it's about reducing the gap between science on the one side and all the work which has been done already on the workflow side, workflow technology side. So let me go to what we planned, and please interrupt me when you see something or hear something which you don't like, or which you would like to comment off. We have a small group here, so we could interrupt each other. There's no problem for me. So I just copied the slides which we presented on Wednesday, but certainly will make a few points here and there to refer to the discussions which we had on Wednesday, which was quite engaged. So you see myself to make this welcome, make some introduction statements about motivation. I will take over the job from Limor on which he did on Wednesday, give a bit of impressions from submissions to a data intelligence journal special issue, and then we'll open the discussion, and probably Alex can help me in running the discussion. So let's see, and the time of course are wrong, but that doesn't really matter. I forgot to change the times. Let me point you to the collaborative notes, which you are asked to make your comments to. So we will make a short report, and all what we find in the collaborative notes will come into the notes which we have. I should also refer you to the OSF page if you don't like to remember this cryptic link. Then just go to the search engine and type in OSF and CWFR, and you will find it. And you will find all the information about what this initiative, which covers at this moment about 60 people, interested people. You will find all information, and I will share some of this information with you in this meeting. So let me start with the deep insights, as already indicated. So we did quite some work. Some of us did quite some work. It was really interesting work, partly to see what all these brilliant researchers are doing. We saw great stuff. And whatever I tell you now about some paradoxes, it's not to blame, let me make this very clear, it's not to blame our excellent colleagues, since we know, or those people who are doing data-intensive science know how difficult data-intensive science can be, and that you normally focus on those things which you need to urgently tackle. So let me share some paradox with you and some observations. The first paradox I should mention here is that when you read all these texts, you see that, in fact, almost all researchers have heard about FAIR and support the idea in general, right? But what you also see is then, when you look into what they are doing, as said, no blaming of anyone, it's difficult enough. But if you look what they are actually doing, the practices in the lab did hardly change in respect to fairness or so during the last 5 years. So that's surprising, but if you are familiar with the work in data labs, data-driven labs, you understand immediately why this is the case. Another related phenomenon is that people in the labs, they like to refer to the publication step, right? So at the very end of a research initiative, research plan, which you have, experimental plan or simulation plan, what have you, you see statements like, when the project is finished, we will see that all stuff, the results and so forth, all stuff is becoming more fair. Well, that means basically that first, much data, I would say, from all what we heard so far in discussions, 90% of the data will not appear as part of open science. And it also appears that there is a big latency. So research projects normally take, data-driven research projects normally take 2, 3, 4, 5 years until you have a publication. And that's a big latency. And of course, we know that the practices are different. So people, and we did it in my institute, people start sharing data very early. Not all data. There is, so I'm not a fan of openness as a eternal principle for everything. No, of course, this will not happen. There will also be some data which is hidden, closed. But many people start sharing some data we did with collaborators and so forth. And this is all done in the ways we are used to for years. So we exchange some files and there's no track mechanism and things like this. So fairness by design is not really done. Actually, it's not done. We didn't see it, maybe with one exception or so in all these proposals. And what we also saw is, and that's related to what we're addressing here with CWFR, you find in many cases now, especially in universities, not so much in well-paid, well-funded research institutes, as was my institute, the Max Planck Institute, where you have good amount of funding in universities. And so what you see is that there are lots of specialized actors and labs. So in these labs actors share some specialized work. So some labs are specialized on making brain recordings, let me say, and other labs are specialized in virtual reality things and so forth, right? So you see a lot of different actors involved in with specialized facilities in a research project. And of course, at the end, you have some data and you involve others that are specialized in machine learning or what have you. So there, what we saw again and again, actually in almost all cases, is that you have a chain of specialized actors and labs. And what you see in the argumentation is, and again, not to blame anyone, what you see in the argumentation is that fairness is shifted to the next one. So you know, people say, look, our colleagues there know what we are doing, know the variables, and they know what to do. And so we just shift some files, and then they know how to do things. So fairness is shifted to the next actor in the chain, and finally, it's not done. And we know, as this, I can only repeat this, we know how difficult it is to achieve fairness, so to make progress in fairness in the lab reality. The last paradox I would like to share with you is, I call the workflow paradox, which is that when you look at across all these applications coming from various disciplines, we've seen a lot of things coming up from social sciences, humanities, up to physics or so. And what you see is many recurring patterns in the daily work of all these scientists working with data-driven. Of course, as was mentioned last time, there's also still much ad hoc work and so forth. There's no doubt, and that will remain. But there's a lot of repeating stuff in there across community borders. What you then, of course, see is that people, these good researchers, just look at their own domain, at their own world of applications, and don't look across borders. So they don't know often that the others in a house further or so, that they are doing similar things when you look at repeating workflow stuff. And there's so much workflow technology out there, and there will be still more. We'll come to this a bit later, and more tools are being invented, and that has good reasons, and we hope that this continues. But on the other hand, you hardly see any use of workflow technology. You see some people working with some scripting tools, of course, but this is mostly ad hoc, mostly driven by manual work and so forth. And we know that often, or in many cases, people after 6 months don't know anymore what they have done. It's not to blame anyone. We know how hard things are. Let me now go on to hesitations. So why didn't we observe real big changes in the situation? We can later discuss whether you have the same observations or whether what I'm telling you is wrong. Researchers are often overwhelmed by all the new tools and initiatives which they are confronted with. So there's a lot of thought how to overcome the gaps or the paradoxes which I have just explained, and other paradoxes. There's a lot of technology development. There are a lot of suggestions, how to improve, for example, semantic explicitness. So all 1 or 2 or 3 years, some projects finalize the work and start trying to convince the people in the labs to change their way of doing. What we see is that there's a kind of fatigueness also about all these approaches, since people don't know often, how much of these things which engaged people come up with will survive the next few years. And then the question is, of course, shall the people in the labs, shall they invest time, costly time? And you see, there's a lot of hesitance to do so then. There's another point I should mention here, which has to do with workflows. I think researchers want to be independent and fast in general, right? And want to use things, which are well established, they know about. And so they don't want to be dependent on scarce workflow experts, for example. And I don't see that, except some people especially in the natural sciences, that some people will become the programmers that can easily invent some new workflows with Jupyter or whatsoever. There's a psychological moment, I should say, when you talk about workflows. There are some researchers that believe, oh, they lose, if they apply workflows, they lose the kind of uniqueness point, and that's something one has to take serious, of course. When you look at all these repetitions, you see that this point of uniqueness is not really tackled or so, or touched. But there are issues of this losing uniqueness point, so one has to look at this. So, given all this, how to overcome these paradoxes and practical help researchers, and that's not something which where we believe that we will be able to change this in 1 week or once or a year. It will be a tough game to come to changes. And let me give you an example here, since that always helps to make things understandable. So just a few months, let me say, ago, a set of German researchers from different labs, all doing experiments with humans. So that ranges from physiological experiments to psychological experiments to economic experiments of economists and so forth. So a whole range of people. I think we were kind of 15 people set together to discuss, how do they do their experiments in the different labs. So I'm not speaking about the phase of data analysis, but just the experiments. And what we saw is that there's a lot of recurring stuff. That may be different in different disciplines, maybe different in different countries, but at least we saw that there's a lot of repeating stuff. And let me briefly mention this to you. So people start with kind of canonical workflow, hypothesis, experimental design, experimental setup, where you go into more detail, define your parameters. They all have to undergo an ethical review. They do some do some pre-registration, like to document what they are doing for later proofs. They do some testing, and then they do some experimental execution, and then they have and this experimental execution is a bit of special, since normally when you run experiments with humans, you have to do a lot of repetitions across humans, so subjects. So you normally, so in our institute, we often had 50 and more, even more subjects to run an experiment to get the evidences. And you have normally many trials with different kinds of stimuli, different kinds of setups to try all kinds of variables. So there's a lot of repetition in this step experimental execution. And I should also mention that in this experimental execution, people often use specialized tools to run the experiments. And these workflows should not intervene with these specialized tools, since these specialized tools often drive special hardware where you optimize on latencies and reaction times and so forth. So specialized software. So if you think of these workflows which I sketched here, then you need to embed these experimental execution programs, for example. There are some other aspects or moments where you use some specialized software, for example, in the experimental setup phase, when you aggregate all your subjects, your 100. You have mostly, the labs have a huge database of people who are willing to participate. So you need to make your selection, blah, 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 blah. So what we saw is that there is a lot of recurrence in there, recurring chains of action. Some may do pre-registrations, other not. So there are steps which some just step over. But in general, you see these recurring patterns. And what happens when people, and that happens often, of course, when people go to another lab to run the same experiment, with different subjects, maybe different facilities, then people have to start doing all the same again and again and again. So enter all the input, doing all the requests, and so forth. So there's no easy possibility to exchange information across the labs, which all have different execution programs. Now let me be short here now. I hope it's clear. So what we believe in is that there are canonical components. Let me use that. So there is a component for extra review that may have different flavors for different universities, but basically all universities ask for the same kind of information. What is your experimental design? And what's your hypothesis? Why are you doing this? And so forth. So there are some flavors, but basically the same information is requested. And we believe in fair digital objects as a kind of exchange point. So the fair digital objects should be created after every step as self-standing units, documenting the phases, the steps, so that you can start again at any step and exchange things at any step. Fair digital objects are self-standing unit. I will not go into fair digital objects now. If you're interested, we can have a discussion later on this. So this is then the game. It looks idealistic, as was commented last time. It will not be simple, to create this situation. I can tell you that those people who were participating in the German discussions, they want to realize this and try it out. They just need some money. So you have some libraries of reusable components, which you can then hope and idealistically fit together, and then you get, of course, all the questions, how to do the input-output relation and so forth. I will not go into this in detail, since most of you probably know this. And I said the glue, when you are using reusable components, the glue is then always the question: what is the glue? What is kind of information do you have to transport between the different steps? And here we believe in FDOs as a basis. Well, we had some working meetings already in this initiative, and we will continue. So if you are interested, have a look at our website in OSF. We will continue with specialized working meetings. We had one working meeting with Galaxy people that inspired me to this diagram. So what you see is that the idea which we have of these canonical components and putting them together in a sequence, that this is not new, of course. And Galaxy is fairly far on the way, I have to say, on what we thought of. So you have a tool, whatever kind of tool. You could also think of machine learning or so. You have a machine learning tool. You want to get it into a Galaxy workflow. Well, you have to do some wrapping to get it integrated into the Galaxy framework so that people can use it. And so if it's integrated, if it has got a wrapper, then you can create these kind of workflows which you see indicated at the right side. Now, this integration of tools is not that easy, not that trivial in all cases. So you need to have some special knowledge to get this integration done. The same is, of course, true with data. You want to include data in Galaxy. Well, they have a couple of import functions for specific data. And of course, the same for export data. So a whole library of functions that fulfill certain input-output requirements. So you could enter then your data or add your data easily if you have these import-export functions into the Galaxy framework. If you don't have these import-export functions, well, you have to do something yourself to get them into the Galaxy framework, or whatever other framework you have. So I said we will continue work also with the Galaxy people. So I could imagine that we will have a specialized training session, really, how to do it, how much time is involved, what kind of knowledge do you have, and so forth to get this done. So we will do this, and we hope on that many people will participate, since for us, it's also clear that we need to train more people and tell them how to do things to get, say, current workflow technology, where it's possible, to get this into the labs. Well, this is a slide which I stole from Alex Hardesty. And of course, we will have a whole spectrum of approaches in the labs. So there, on the right side, you see those people who believe in scripts, who are solving some special issues, who are testing some paradigms. And often these, if you are addressing a completely new paradigm, you need to do some tests, ad hoc things, and so forth. We know this. So there will be always some cases where people rely on scripting tools, on tools like Jupyter that support more easily ad hoc work. And on the left side, you see the more, the more structured approach with canonical components, much more automation, much more repeatable work. And there you come with tools like Galaxy or some new tools which will be invented. And of course, the canonical framework idea which we have is on the left side. Still saying, you know, again, that there will be ad hoc work, which is more to find on the right side. And as you can see, our colleagues here, Alex Hardesty, and so they also use this left side approach in a project called BioWell. Well, Alex, if there's a question, Alex is around and can give answers what they exactly did. Well, that's all what I wanted to say as a kind of introduction to the issue of CWFR. So as said, we don't want to invent new technologies, but our main goal is, or question is, what do we need to do to overcome this huge gap between technology on the one side and reality in the labs on the other side? And that's not easy. Let me briefly mention what we intend to do in the CWFR initiative. We had some meetings. We have the BoF session now, and we will continue with meetings. So we will have, I forgot to change the date, it just happened the last days. On 2nd of June, we will have a presentation and discussion with Jupyter experts. How do they do it? What needs to be done? How difficult it is to include own applications and so forth. On 2nd of July, we have a presentation or discussion with those people who do the RO great work, and it's about not so much about workflows systems, but about how to document your states. And your results, how to document, the results which you get at every step or at the end of a workflow. So we will discuss this with them, and we will certainly have future ideas. In the last discussion on Wednesday, we already got some new ideas. What I'm going to do now, so let me ask, is Maggie around or Limo around? So Limo probably not, it's too early for her. In the States, is Maggie around?
I haven't seen Maggie yet.
No, so then I will just continue and show the slides which were shown by, were discussed by Lemur. So let me briefly refer to you to some action which we did currently. It will not take too much time, but you may be interested in reading and maybe contributing in some way. We'll see. So we ask many people, all those people which we could address in the different research infrastructures in Europe and the US and so forth, to come up with abstracts on describing their workflow practices in their labs. And we will do it. We'll use the Data Intelligence Journal for this, which is, as you can see, a journal linked with MIT, but managed by some colleagues in the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And it's addressing all kinds of aspects which have to do with data-driven science.
So we had a call for abstracts first, or papers, and we got 30 responses. We were overwhelmed by this. Let me briefly say who are the special guest editors are. As you can imagine, it's Alex Hardesty from Cardiff, Maggie Hellström from Lund University, Limor Peer from Yale, and myself. So we will drive this special issue ahead. We have one special issue managing editor, which is Feng Hong Yu from the Academy of Science in China. So we had for categories, in our call for papers, we asked, we addressed for categories. So categories CWFR and the use of fair digital objects, so focusing more on all aspects and how, for example, FDOs could help in documenting steps when you work with distributed components, how FDOs could play the glue for bringing things together and being persistent and self-standing information units, which can be used at different places, at different labs and so forth. So then we had an issue on current workflow technologies. So the question was then, if you have workflow technologies, how would you relate these workflow technologies to the ideas of CWFR, as I briefly introduced that? We had the question for research-driven workflows, for practical cases, and also for concepts. So to try to engage researchers that are thinking of workflows, applying workflows in their lab, and who do this, and who already do this, and invoke abstracts or contributions, that show current practices. And of course, we had the question, about advanced workflow technologies. So you could say that Galaxy or Arrow Create also belong to these advanced concepts, and we saw that other ideas came up in the abstracts. So we received 30 abstracts, and we had to the reviewers refused 3, since they were not really addressing the issues. Good papers were not really addressing the issues which we wanted to have in this special issue. We will now, so we reviewed all the abstracts, 2 pages abstracts, and invited all 27 people to write now full papers. We expected much less contributions, I must say, but it's good to have so many. Now we are discussing with the data intelligence journal to not just have one special issue, but maybe 2 special issues. So and maybe there could be even 3 special issues. Who knows? Since we will continue the discussions on specific topics. If you are interested in reviewing and serving as reviewer, please send me an email. So we will now set up the whole process, since all papers, full papers, will now undergo the normal review process. Let me briefly mention, what we came across. This may be of interest for you. So what we saw is that 15 of these 27 contributions came up with a clear link to the ideas, the concepts of CWFR. So addressing the ideas of components, addressing the idea of fair digital objects or high quality documentation documentation standards. 12 with no or hardly or only a weak link to these concepts. So 12 then reporting really on the workflow, the new or interesting workflow as work which they do in their lab. And we got quite exciting stuff. You could briefly categorize them in 3 categories. So 50% almost, you can say, understand the issues of CWFR and had a look to what the ideas are. 30% just refer to their own excellent work, which is fair enough. And you could also see that 20% did focus on their work and just added some words on CWFR to fit to the call. So nothing, no bad word about this. So I think we were able to take this all, since it was good work and it was high quality stuff which we received. 11 of them were conceptual, more conceptual, was not always quite clear, and 16 were already practical or operational. So that also is a good spread which we wanted to achieve. If you look to who contributed this, you could say that, again, this is roughly, these numbers are rough numbers. 10 came from IT people, clearly you could see this. 8 from the environmental science, 4 from life science, 3 social science and humanities, 1 from physics, and 1 was a generic paper. And when you look to the tools which I just mentioned those tools have more hits than 1, then you could say, well, it's not only tools, it's also standards or so. It's a bit difficult, documentation standard. But anyhow, if you look to what we found there, you saw that many people or some people use already Jupyter. Handle is used, the Handle system for giving PIDs. The Arrow-Crate documentation standard is used by some, although the three contributions were from the people who are driving the Arrow-Crate standard. Galaxy is used by 3, and the common workflow language is used also by 3. All the rest of the 19 different tools were tools just you mentioned one time, and there were a lot of new workflow tools I never heard before. So we're up to the discussion. So I'll stop here. I could share a few questions with you, but maybe I first stop here and ask for contributions, questions, if you would like me to do so. I could discuss briefly a few questions which we came up with, but first let me open the discussion. Thanks a lot so far. And Alex, please help me if I couldn't see anything on the chat. So I would like to motivate, if I may say so, Alex, I would like to motivate all people who use the chat to also make this verbally, since I can't read this.
So no, it's fine. We can do that now. If you stop sharing your screen, then
oh yes, let me do that.
We're having a bit of audio problems. Your audio is coming and going. I think most people got what was said. There's a couple of questions in the chat. They're quite long questions. They're from Paolo Manghi, I think. Paolo, do you want to switch on your camera and audio and ask the questions verbally? I think that's the easiest way.
Hello, Peter. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. So thanks. This is thank you. Good to see you again. These are very interesting topics. We actually have worked on this for some time, and of course we'd be pleased to provide some input. But first, I would like to understand what is the focus exactly. So my question was: is the working group? Can you please mute, because I hear my voice?
If I understood you correctly, but Alex, maybe you also understood what Paolo was questioning. So the audio is a bit tricky here. The purpose is to have a sequence of meetings, I would say, Paolo, which have the intentions to raise question as how to. So we will have a meeting and confront the Jupyter experts, for example. How do you do this? How much time does it take? So it's a bit of demonstrating, what is needed, but also a bit of training. But the third point is Paulo, that we need to understand what is missing. So we believe that we miss easy ways to include components or add components to workflows. You could say, Galaxy is a good example, right? Many people in the biomed science use already Galaxy, and mostly, as you have seen, maybe use pre-existed workflows, which are already there in the libraries. So how can we speed this up? How to include more disciplines? How make it easy? So there's no easy answer, but that's
okay. That's slightly different from what I understood in the beginning. That's probably because I was driven my line of thoughts. But because one thing that I think could be related with what you're doing, and it is interesting, in fact, is the overall idea of modeling the workflows of science, independently of the fact that these are digital, right? So, but basically for each discipline, it would be great to have a sort of steps that you need to follow when you perform your science, set of templates, like a sort of workflows, templates that you can adopt. And when you perform your science, you pick the one that you prefer. These should be agreed on at the scientific level, of course, at the discipline level. And when you write your science, you try to follow these workflows, which is a way of explaining things, a way of producing your elements. So this eases the review process, eases the evaluation, eases also the evaluation of quality of the promises that you're making, and the comparison also between different work, right? Because those following the same workflows can be more easily confronted in a way.
Exactly the point.
Yes,
exactly.
Of course, this comes down So when the workflow is digital, then this comes down to how to implement it. So, for example, in the most generic version, you have this protocols.io that allows you to define templates of workflows which can be shared across scientists that can instantiate the workflows when they perform science. But then when it comes to be effectively digital, so executable by machineries, you have this hybrid problem. So the fact that it's very rarely the case where you can take Galaxy and use it in a completely different context, right? So these are two different levels: conceptual and implementation. And when we try to tackle both, we recognize that there was a connection, but it's not easily achievable. So we'd be pleased to really be part of this effort. I think it's very important.
I think that Paolo makes a very good point here, and it was clear to me from the session that we had earlier in the week and in other discussions as well, is that for many people there is this automatic conclusion, this automatic jump that when we talk about canonical workflows for research, we're talking about the detailed electronic workflows using tools like Galaxy or Taverna or Kepler or any to do the very detailed analysis steps at quite a low level, and I think it's important that we try to understand that what we're talking about here is to rise up. And rather, we're talking more about the life cycle of science. I think Paolo put it very well as the workflow of science. It's the whole life cycle from the beginning of the planning of the research that you're going to do, and dealing with the data management plans and the ethical approvals and the sample design and all this stuff, through the active research, and then into the the curation, the preservation, the dissemination, and the reuse of the results. So it's at that level we're talking, and I think that's what Paolo's saying as well, isn't it?
Well, let me add you one thing. So thanks, Paolo. I think
we are fully on the same page here, right?
Yeah.
So thanks for your comment. But let me add one point, Alex, here. So I think when we got our abstracts, and I hope you will see all them as papers in some time. So when we got the abstracts, you could see that people touch different, phases in the scientific workflow, as you called it, Paolo, right? So Limor Peer, for example, from Yale, is an expert in automating the publication step. You see what I mean, right? So aggregate, and that's something you are very familiar with, aggregating all the elements which are important for publication, right, in social science. So, and other people are, as you have seen, are driving experiments. So you see that these workflow snippets, fragments, addressing different phases in the life cycle. Yeah. So thanks, Paulo. So if you are interested to participate, I mean, there's no big deal. So you just send me an email, and I will include you in the mail list. Right? That holds for everyone. Since this is an open group, as I said, we have currently about 60 people following this, and we will continue this. And any suggestion for topics which should be addressed, which go into these things which are addressed by CWFR, should become a meeting. And as I said, we don't want to start another initiative or go for money or whatsoever. No, it's just putting it up there and discussing, right? And at a certain moment, everyone does it, and then we will finish. Any other?
Paolo had another question as well. I don't know whether it was covered.
No, I think it was covered. Yes,
it was covered. Okay. So there are no other questions in the chat at the moment. But if anybody wants to switch on their camera and their audio and ask, a question directly to Peter or myself, please do so.
So if there is no question, then maybe let me ask a few questions. So I can't see, by the way, how many people are involved still.
Okay, so Hans.
See you again.
Hi, Peter. Long time no see. By the way, I guess you have a Wackelkontakt on your microphone or something.
No.
So I just want to observe, address one of your first sentences. Why are people not adopting the FAIR principles, etc.? Well, I think there is a very easy answer to that. There is nothing in it for them. They are all driven, or most of them are driven by requirements on outputs like achieving a certain H index, etc. And so as long as it doesn't help them to do that, they will not do it. And also it's always the amount of work it takes in addition, or whether it saves them work. And at this point in time, I think there are too many tools which don't save work, but just add work.
Absolutely.
The other thing is, it may be possible to use a workflow framework, a specific one, I mean, in the setting of an individual researcher or a small working group in a lab, in a physical lab, I mean. But as soon, for example, as you begin working collaboratively with people all over the world, they all would need to adopt the same framework and have it working in a network, online, I mean, all the time, which is a problem, of course, if one university has begun, or one lab has begun to framework or the workflow system 1, and the other one the workflow system 2, and so on. And the last point is, which we encountered in the Mosaic expedition, for example, which included 600 people from, I think, 20 countries, some of them in Chinese, behind the Great Firewall, etc. But they needed to work in the field that is partially on ice flow with a bandwidth of 128 kilobit per second to home. You will see that it is quite problematic to stringently use an electronic workflow system. People collecting samples in the snow had to wonder whether some kind of tablet would work in the cold.
Right.
So they prefer to use pencils, writing up their things, and so on and so on. And there are so many different problems involved in steering people to work together using the same within the same framework and have it digital throughout.
Yep.
So I think there will be much time needed to actually implement such things.
Yes, Hans.
Thanks, Hans.
If
May I
may
react on this? Paulo, sorry.
Yes, quickly. Just this is the point that I was trying to make. So there is a distinction between these two models, right? One where you assume that you have one workflow engine and people comply to it. That's problem solved. The effort is on those who want to participate. And the problem, instead of making different such systems, even where they don't exist at all, coexist. And that's the system of systems scenario, where some of the mediation work has to be taken on board by those who are trying to orchestrate. And these are two different levels. And of course, you embark in completely different adventures. When you try to apply the first approach, which is the one of adopting one engine across different sciences, this will never work, because different sciences have their own ideas, their own workflows. They don't buy it. They will never buy it. It's too much of an effort to invest in such a bet, because it is a bet in the end. Instead, in a system of systems, what you're trying to do is to mitigate the compliance issues in the beginning and try to make the engine an opportunity for the participatory elements, right? So they are in without making any effort, because you are taking on board the effort, and they find out that if this will be the case, they find out that it is useful. And then in this case, they may be more, keen in making some effort. So it's what the EOSC is trying basically to implement as a philosophy, right? So you don't impose anything. You're trying to make an effort to simplify this. And I think those who are trying to do it need to take into account that a lot of cost is to be taken on board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So may I, there's a whole set of points. So let me start with you, Paulo, the system of system. I mean, it's a matter of abstractions, right? And how far you can go. And abstraction always means more effort for people than who are doing things. So that's as you said, that's really ask very careful design steps on different levels. And I also don't believe that you will have one system for everything, except maybe that you have a documentation system which goes for everything, right? Which I could imagine. Okay, so that's one point, but that's another discussion, Paulo, which we will certainly have to continue in a more concrete way. So let me respond to Hans, and let me start from the end. Hans, I know this very well. This your eyes, was your eyes was our jungle. So we send people to the jungle, and also doing pen and paper experiments. Yes, there are all these exceptions, but we just started interaction with Alex Henderson. So Alex made a comment last Wednesday. And if you want to participate in this discussion, let me know. I mean, you just send me an email and you're in these discussions. So he sent me an email. His comment was mainly, about ad hoc staff and the need of ad hoc staff. And in this discussion, I showed them several examples. So not I say ignoring these ad hoc cases, since I know it from our own work, but showing some examples from our own work, from this collaboration which we did, which I briefly introduced from the German people doing experiments with humans, and from what we saw in the 75 research proposals. There are exceptions. There are lots of these repetitive patterns where you can where you are far away from ad hoc scripting, since the facilities which you are using are much too expensive. So you have to design your experiment very carefully, knowing what you get, what kind of facilities you get. You have, as Paulo also indicated, you have a lot of review processes, even also technical review processes. If you want to use a virtual reality system, do you really understand what it does and what it does not, and so forth. So believe me, there's a lot of ad hoc stuff, but believe me, we have seen so much recurring stuff, it's unbelievable. So that's one point. The other point was collaboration. Yes, Hans, you're right. There are limits if you have collaborations, definitely. But on purpose, I cited this example from these people in Germany doing experiments with humans. And I know from other colleagues in other labs, in our field at least, that it's all very similar. Then you see that people indeed, especially from universities, that indeed they want to run the same experiment in another lab for whatever reasons. Often it's subjects, right? Different types of subjects. And at this moment, as I said, they have to redo the stuff. If you would have components, you don't, and if you would rely on something like FDO or Aerocrate in FDO form, then you would have it more easy to exchange information between the different lab experiment software. So it's not easy. I will not say it's done tomorrow, but this is the way we need to go, I guess. And the last point is, yes, Hans, you're right. The researcher is against changes, and for good reasons. I was against some of these changes. And George, our good friend George Strawn, in his short ways of expressing things, he always answers, yes, the individual researcher is against standards, but the research organization's not. You all know that 90%, if you do data-driven work, 80%, if you do data-driven work, there are surveys, a bit older, 5 years or so, that clearly indicate that 80% of our work, when we do data-driven research, is wasted for what they call Jesus. Now the word is not on my tip of my tongue. Wrangling. It's wasted for data wrangling. Of course, there are differences between when you do experimental work or analytic work and so forth. But there is a lot of time wasted by data wrangling. Well, we need to address this, and FAIR is just a way to address this. You could also say that, for example, in the health work, clinical work in Netherlands, that's an estimate which was done 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was reported in the World Economic Forum. If you look to all the expenses in the medical world in Netherlands, it's the estimate is that you pay 30%, 30 billion euros per year are wasted to non-fair data. So we need to make steps to fair data. The researchers will not do it if there are not tools supporting that and so forth, right? And they hate bureaucracy, so you can put more bureaucracy on them since they hate that, and that's really taking away of their time. So let me stop here. I don't know, Alex, whether you have a comment, or is Maggie around, or whether she has a comment.
No, I don't have a comment at the moment. I was just picking up on the 2 papers that Paolo has posted into the chat, which comes out of the work of his institution. There's one there on how to figure out how to behave in these kinds of heterogeneous scenarios, and the other is about how to model these research workflows from a conceptual point of view. They're probably worth looking into for this group to see, where they leave off and what more is needed.
So Paolo, I don't know how much we will get from the chats, and so normally I saw from the Wednesday meeting that we can see it, but please send an email to not forget things, right? So to be sure.
Yeah, I've got those details. I've picked them up.
I put the references into the Google Doc that you shared, and also the questions. So
great. Then we have it. Okay, great. Yeah. So then we need to make a plan and see, you know, how we can, how we will make progress. Yep.
The special issue is closed, right, in terms of submission?
Yes, we have to follow rules. But Paolo, as I said, you know, so we didn't expect 30 contributions, to be honest, right? So we are discussing now 2 special issues.
Okay.
I don't have a third one, but you know, that depends. Do we have a critical mass on new topics which are really relevant to be discussed? You see what I mean, right? So why not? I mean, you know, I think the DI people are happy about good suggestions where we can expect quality things which brings the community further.
Yes,
and
yes.
you know, we all agreed, and I think Hans put this the fingers into this. It will not; these changes will not be a matter of 2 months or 3 months or 5 months. No, it will be a long process, right? So,
Thank you.
yeah. How far are we in time, by the way?
We have 28 minutes left.
Yeah. So maybe I tell you a bit about what was commented last time, if you like. So I already mentioned the work. So the discussion on ad hoc, which we will bring up. We will have the discussion in the CWFR forum, working group, whatever you call it. So if you want to participate, please send me an email and I will set you on the email list. So there was this issue about ad hoc versus planned stuff, and you know, we'll discuss this. I don't have to repeat this. There's a lot of ad hoc work, and that will remain. Hans also gave an example, you know, of ice work. I work in the ice, and so forth. But there's also an increasing amount of planned thing, which also has the purpose of documentation. So if you use a workflow, and I think everyone understands that immediately, instead of ad hoc processes, if you do your workflows right, you get automatically a documentation, so that after 6 months you still know what you've done, right? Which is a big problem now. I know it from our own institute. So Stian, the guy from Manchester, raised the issue of documentation. So we will discuss that. There was, in the last time, there was a discussion about collections. And the rationale is that when you do data analysis, currently with stochastic means like machine learning stuff or so, or whatever tools you are algorithm you are using, you need a lot of data. Normally, you do collections, right? So you aggregate data. So that's what we did when we did machine learning stuff. You aggregate a lot of data. And depending on your depth of, on your size of your models, you get a lot of free parameters which you have to fit. And of course, these collections are crucial. So if you do those of you who do machine learning stuff, you know that you redo your collections. You know, you group your data in different ways to see whether that has any effect. So collections are very important. At this moment, we don't have a standardized, harmonized way to process or to define collections. There was a suggestion from the RDA working group on scientific collections, and there is and Galaxy has a method. So we need to look into this at a certain moment to see how we can harmonize this, since processing collections is an important point. We had a discussion about data publication. The question was then, so when we say something about, oh yeah, that was the reason of open science by design. I think there's a misunderstanding when we use that term, and I have to be careful as well. We don't mean that anything is, first, we don't mean that anything has to be open. And second, there are different grades of openness. So what our colleague Sarah from Sam Max Planck Institute said, you know, that the quality publication of data, so the final act, is something that has to be well prepared, blah, 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 quality control and so forth. but there are steps in between. So I know when I was still in job, we shared a lot of data, and I know this is practice in other institutes as well. So sharing of data means it's not really publication in the how do you say, in the traditional sense, but it's sharing and people are using it. So you should be aware that people are using it. So you should give this data an identity so that you later can trace what's happening. There was also an issue about proprietary software. Well, that's all, of course, awful. Often proprietors to embed proprietary software into such workflows. We know the problems. Yep. And there was a question about input-output relations, and that's, of course, also very critical. And there was a reference to the EDAM ontology of used by the bioinformatics people. And I just heard yesterday that about the work of the IADOPT project. Nice work. So there's a lot of open issues when you to improve the input-output relations. And yeah, I think these were the topics which I mentioned. Alex, did I or Maggie, did I forget something?
No, you didn't forget anything. I mean, that last topic you mentioned about the IADOPT framework relates to also a point that Carlos Wolf made about the harmonization of the units that are used in different scientific disciplines and the role that type registries can play there.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't see any more questions in the chat or the Q&A. If anybody does have a question or a comment to make, please just turn on your microphone and your camera, and we'll see you and you can chat.
Yeah. So let me just I will add to the chat my email address.
I did it already, but you can put it in again.
So if someone wants to participate in this, there's no secret.
The chat will be saved and sent to you anyway, Peter, I think. So,
so that's my email address. So send me an email address, and
okay.
I will just add you to the list.
Okay.
And then you can participate. And as said, look at the CWFR site where we announce things, and then we will continue the discussion.
Okay, so Hans is coming back.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be. You mentioned that you have an email list for this group. Why don't you just use the standard tool of RDA, where everybody can join and then you get automatically on an email list? So
well,
that is.
Don't ask this question. We just started like this, and now we are on this. So just do it. We didn't discuss this, Alex. We could make a registration issue on the website. So
that's the point you are making about standard workflow tools, I think. Yeah, it's too much work to change.
There are always things you started and you have to live with it for a moment, but I think that's doable. Thanks for the provocation anyhow.
Okay, so what are the next steps, Peter?
Well, the next steps are.
I think we're close to being able to wrap this up now. So yeah,
the next steps are we will write the note. So we'll take all input which we can find in the chats and in this document. We already started an interaction per email, but we will make it open. So we will write a note. It will appear in the CWFR site. There's no secret. I think that's open. Most of the stuff is open. There's some stuff which is internal, which we probably have not opened, but most of the stuff is open. If there's some problem, just tell me or tell us. Then we will have the next meetings. So this next meeting is on Jupyter. As I said, we used the style which was invented by Paulo's boss, old boss. I don't know whether he's still around. Paolo, I can't even recall his name. It's about working meetings, so not just talks, but where we provoke some discussion, where we provoke our presenters with concrete cases. So do tell us, how to do things, how to do this, and then that's always you can't predict what comes out, so it's always challenging to see how that will then go. But that's what we do, working meetings. So the next one is on 2nd June, and the next one is about Aero Crate on 2nd July. We will plan new dates. If you want to participate as reviewer, please send me an email as well. We are now starting the review process, basically, for the papers which will come in.
I think I would love to participate.
Right? Sorry.
I would love to participate to the meetings. I am afraid I have no time to review. I have too many things, including reviews ongoing now. So it's
a pity, but accepted. Paolo, accepted.
No, but for the meetings, I'd be pleased to participate.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Yeah. Alex, are we done?
I think we're done. Yes. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much to all of the participants for an interesting and lively debate.
Yep. Thanks also from my side. Thanks a lot, and see you again. Thanks, Ryan, for the help.
Thank you. Can I just